you were one of the first people in the US to show interest in natural hydrogen. How did you get there?
But one way or another, we want to produce hydrogen in real time at rates that are we can then produce at the wellhead that are economic.
Can we do it even more if it works in Oman? Can we scale it?
And that number sounds scary because then you're like, well, wait, how are we going to do 10,000, 100,000 or more?
How do you feel about the projection of the future of natural hydrogen and stimulated hydrogen, especially? Hello and welcome back to the Natural Hydrogen Investment Podcast, where we help you understand the evolving opportunity of this nascent and very promising space. I'm Anthony Muhye, hydrogen enthusiast and chemical engineer.
And I am Morten, specialized investor and founder of Natural Hydrogen Ventures.
Every 2 weeks, we provide you with an insightful video, interview, or other type of content in which we talk about natural hydrogen, how it's evolving, what it looks like, and how to get involved in it. Don't forget that we have the 2025 Investor Report for Natural Hydrogen. We recently finally updated it because I've been promising this for a while and we hadn't, but we recently finally updated it. It's got many new names. It's got tons of new stock prices and acreage and so on. So please go and download it if you haven't. You will be subscribed to our newsletter, which is excellent. I think everybody agrees. And if you're watching this on YouTube, listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. If you're also interested, you can share it with your colleagues. They will probably enjoy it too. So today we have an episode which you may find quite interesting if you have a bit of curiosity around stimulated hydrogen. On the Natural Hydrogen Investment Podcast, we've discussed a number of technologies up to now. Companies that are leading the charge, we've also talked with CEOs, we've talked with industry leaders, with the intention of shining a spotlight on where we are now, how the space will evolve, and how will it look in a few years. But there's been one specific technology we haven't covered yet because we've been waiting for the right person to talk about it. Stimulated hydrogen. And stimulated hydrogen, also known as stimulated geologic hydrogen or orange hydrogen, I don't think Morten likes that classification, refers to hydrogen produced underground by artificially accelerating natural reactions in rocks, mainly by injecting fluids like water or organic acids into iron-rich or ultramafic minerals to trigger hydrogen generation reactions, often through processes like serpentinization, which you've probably heard of at this point. And joining us today is one of the leading global experts on stimulated hydrogen, who will be able to explain it far better than I can, because I'm actually reading a bit on the screen to guide myself. Dr. Alexis Templeton, Professor of Geochemistry and Geobiology in the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Colorado. More specifically related to stimulated hydrogen, Dr. Templeton is leading a key international project with CU Boulder alongside partners at Columbia University, the University of Southampton, Montana State University, 44.01, and Eden Geopower in the Samal Ophiolite in Oman, to test and optimize our ability to stimulate production of geological hydrogen from ultramafic rocks. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Templeton. Morten and I have been saving this specific episode for today and for you.
Great. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here with both of you and to follow up on some great conversations we got to have in London in the pub this summer.
Yes, actually, just to mention something to our viewers, I hadn't quite met Dr. Templeton, Alexis, until we met in London. And she approached me while I was sitting down. I was just after one of the chats, and she said, "Your podcast is amazing. I watch it all the time. So you're doing a really great job." And that to me was really uplifting. I mean, I ran and I told Morten, look, Morten, Alexis Templeton has just told us she loves our podcast. She's one of the first people in the space to be in natural hydrogen. And she's telling us our podcast is good. This is good news, isn't it?
It was good and well starstruck. That was nice to see, Anthony. And now everyone knows that Flatter will bring you to be on the guest on our podcast. And while I have, taking, it's out of script. I'm dying to say something of the colors when you said sometimes this is called orange hydrogen, because my normal argument will be that it makes no sense. Why should it be one color? Well, but this is good because orange makes me think that of an orange. You can squeeze hydrogen out of the rocks. So let's still call it stimulated hydrogen. But, it was a close call this time around.
That's a good mental image for all of us. Yeah, let's go back to the script. So thank you, Alexis, for being with us. And I need to ask you, as probably many people, they want to wonder as well. They want to know, How did you get involved with natural hydrogen in general? Because we recently had an interview where you were mentioned, and you were one of the first people in the US to show interest in natural hydrogen. How did you get there?
The simplest answer to that question is that back in the summer of 2022, I think it was, I went down to an RPE summit in Denver to have a conversation with Doug Wicks, where he wanted to say, do you know how rocks make hydrogen? And I said, yes. And that began a multi-hour foray into exploring different topics in hydrogen. But to step back a little bit, why was I so enthusiastic with that answer is that I'd say about 15 years ago, quite early in my career, I was very focused on iron, actually, how iron in rocks provided energy that sustained microbial metabolisms. So there's all these life forms that can essentially eat rocks and oxidize iron to sustain themselves. And we moved to starting to question, actually, how could we liberate that energy more easily to sustain microbial activity? And rocks will naturally react with water to produce hydrogen. And hydrogen's a universal energy source for life on this planet. So in this time window, we've been trying to understand a lot of fundamental processes about how water reacts with rocks within what I call the low temperature regime, the temperature regime in which life can reside. Quite different than the hot and hydrothermal regime, where people know hydrogen comes out of sort of hydrothermal vents and other kinds of systems on the planet. But we wanted to ask, can rocks make hydrogen at low temperature? And if so, how do they do it? What are the reactions that control the rates and the extent of hydrogen generation? And how does that couple directly to microbial activity that then consumes hydrogen as it's being produced? And all of that became central to our understanding of hydrogen systems, particularly through the interest of NASA, to ask, where can hydrogen-based life exist on our planet Earth? And where could it maybe exist elsewhere in our solar system on other rocky bodies?
So
Yes.
when I'm done thinking of where to get a license in Europe, I'll think about the rest of the solar system. We come across this sometimes, that obviously is the same, should be the same mechanism. Yeah. Anthony.
No, and I find it fascinating that you mentioned the rest of the solar system with NASA, because that's something we are thinking of since recently, I think. Many decades ago, when people imagined life on other planets, they imagined alien beings or whatever, but humanoids or whatever. But we need to think also of possible microorganisms that will take a lot of work to be able to see them. I'm sorry I'm going such on a tangent here, but this is a subject which is very interesting, and now bringing it to this podcast is also very quite cool, actually.
One other comment I want to make along those lines, so coming back to RPE, they really did catalyze a lot of discussion. They hadn't yet launched a program. This was a good year in advance of that, but they put out a request for information. And in that request for information were a lot of foundational knowledge, things they want to know. What did we already know about the types of rocks and minerals that can produce hydrogen and the mechanisms of that? And they also asked a lot of biological questions, and they asked different types of engineering questions to see what the state of the art in the field was. And it was in reading that request for information where I realized we really did have a lot of knowledge we should bring to bear. It was extremely important to try to apply that knowledge immediately. And I wrote a series of short sort of white papers in response that helped initiate discussions with his team. And Emily Yednak was really integral at this point in time in interviewing people all over the world, trying to understand the state of our understanding of natural or the potential for stimulated hydrogen. And I will credit her for putting me in contact with many different groups. Some of them were ventures, some of them were technical and scientific, some were government, that wanted to, again, discuss the state of the art of the field at that point in time to figure out whether it was something we could move on. And every one of those conversations grew my own interest and commitment to engaging in this field.
It's okay. And now, I mean, we want to talk about Oman, right? We want to, because that's going to be quite central to the episode. But firstly, we have to understand what you're doing and where this next step of stimulated hydrogen becomes part of the story in hydrogen, natural hydrogen, which is still so nascent, right? Which is still so new. What is stimulated hydrogen when we compare it to natural hydrogen? And is it something separate, or is it something we can say is the same but quicker, or the same but more efficient?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll step back a little bit and just to explain the way I would think of just a natural hydrogen system so I can contrast it with stimulated. So in these natural hydrogen systems where we're looking globally, the exploration models continue to evolve, but they still have this essential components of looking for a existing source of hydrogen. Our planet's been making hydrogen through its whole history. So we're looking for places where hydrogen's been produced through time. It has a source that we can identify, but most likely that's not where the hydrogen is now. It's migrated, moved, and been effectively trapped into a reservoir. And the hope is that we have accumulated through time enough hydrogen that we have a sort of economic quantities there that we can produce. And there's many aspects of the hydrogen systems models that are under refinement of understanding the efficiency of that migration and preservation. Stimulated hydrogen is the idea that we understand broadly that there's many rock types and many mechanisms that could produce hydrogen. But we believe we can come into systems where the hydrogen hasn't been produced yet. Typically, it wasn't produced there because water didn't get in. Water is an essential ingredient of many, not all, but many hydrogen-producing reactions. So if the water hasn't been able to react with those rocks previously, they still store a lot of potential in them. We want to look at ways to engineer the system to significantly enhance fluid circulation and to increase the rates of hydrogen production. And that's why, going back to these colors, we don't call it orange or these things. Many companies are now calling it engineered hydrogen or manufactured hydrogen. And they want to focus on producing hydrogen. There's a lot of other end uses of it, but the production process. And how do we optimize the conditions in the subsurface to do in situ production? So can we do it under ambient conditions, or are we deep enough and hot enough, or do we need to change the thermal regime? Do we need to enhance how fast fluids circulate? Do we need chemical catalysts? But one way or another, we want to produce hydrogen in real time at rates that are we can then produce at the wellhead that are economic.
Right. And one of the things I heard a while back was somebody mentioned, well, you're a chemical engineer. You should be more excited about stimulated hydrogen than you should about natural hydrogen in its purest form, because it will require people like you to get involved and find out what it is that will be needed and how much of it, like mass balance and so on, when it comes to chemical catalysts and so on, which could be used for stimulated hydrogen. So it is something which I'm following very closely. Now, when it comes to following closely, I know you've been in natural hydrogen for a while, and this is already a frontier science, right? Because we're talking about something which is still kind of theoretical in many aspects still. But you went a step ahead, and you're interested now in studying on the ground stimulated hydrogen. How did you go from that step to the other? What got you involved in stimulated hydrogen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of room here for technological innovation, and it's going to be required. So I've worked in a lot of natural hydrogen systems. Again, not quite what I meant by earlier ones that people are exploring for that have economic quantities, but I've worked in systems where hydrogen is being continuously produced, and we've tried to understand that dynamic. But the concentrations are much lower than what people are searching for. And so we've been part of the recognition that to do economic hydrogen production in a stimulated or engineered system, we're going to need to increase the rates of reaction 10,000 or more, could maybe 100,000 times against what the natural ambient rate is. So what we then need to know is what are the exact reactions that we're trying to promote in the optimal conditions, and then how are we going to engineer these systems to do it? And so with the team that I have here at CU Boulder, I have a group of both geochemists and geomicrobiologists that we've worked closely together in many of these natural systems. And I think we can bring a lot of the basic knowledge we have to applying it here in terms of how to promote the reactions that are going to give us the highest yields of hydrogen generation, understand what the potential for chemical catalysis may or may not be, and to critically assess that, to help understand these questions of whether or not microbial activity may be playing a major role in consuming the hydrogen that is being produced in these systems. They're only a fraction of the questions that need to be addressed, but it's definitely really exciting to be able to say we think we have a lot of pre-existing knowledge that could then be used to both critically assess this in the environment and to look at the proposed plans and technologies, as well as help give feedback to the ecosystem in terms of the technologies that'll be the most disruptive or most essential in stimulated hydrogen succeeding. And so we're kind of full on now into this game. We want to engage across government, industry, and academia in promoting this discussion, collaboration, because to see if we can help move this as fast as possible.
Right, and you mentioned those numbers, which are up to 10,000 times the production we
Or at least.
At
At
least,
least.
I heard incorrectly then, yeah.
Mhm.
At least 10,000 times. So in other words, which is not a question per se, but in other words, we're building the factories of natural hydrogen with stimulated hydrogen, correct?
And that number sounds scary because then you're like, well, wait, how are we going to do 10,000, 100,000 or more?
Yes.
But the whole point was we stimulated goes after areas where the rocks are kind of quiet right now. They're sitting there with all the potential. You don't want them to have been burning off that hydrogen. So they're sitting there quiet, but they're hopefully slowly reacting through time. We want to come engineer them and really increase those rates and bring them onto production. And so, but it does require, it's not just taking it up 10 or 100 fold. You really do need to make a major change in the rate of production to get it to economic.
Thank you for sharing that.
Could it be said from an investment point of view that the reason why you want to pursue this is that you can potentially, hopefully, produce much more, that there could be more places where this could be done? Or is it, I'm an investor in me burns to, see that beyond the science, that why bother really? I guess it's because we could start producing instead of just finding places where nature have done it for us.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think both strategies absolutely need to be pursued. For the rationale behind stimulated is that, one, there's this huge potential energy resource that has been untapped, and maybe we have the engineering approaches to utilize it. So that's very attractive, and the ability to have control on where do we want to develop these systems, and you could control even the rate at which you produce hydrogen from them. Or you want to try and blow these out as fast as you possibly can? Do you want to sustain energy generation over a given window of time, depending on what the end use of hydrogen is going to be in that type of system? But one of the biggest reasons would be that they don't overlap geographically necessarily. Areas where there's these natural accumulations that we may be developing could be separated from where exactly are the source rocks that we would be using and choosing to stimulate for geologic hydrogen production. So that now broadens the number of places where hydrogen might be available as an energy source. So the two together make a really good combination in terms of if you want to build a broader infrastructure and economy on hydrogen.
And it makes the space more attractive too, if you think about it, because it's you're not only looking where there currently is, but where there might be. And if you have the technology, you can make that happen. So it's quite interesting. You mentioned something. I saw a note from you which said you wanted to talk a bit more about the technical limitations we might have now that companies have to overcome. Would be nice to add that in now, if you're open to.
Sure. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing the massive proliferation of startup companies in geologic hydrogen, and they span so many different facets of this ecosystem. And on one end right now are a lot of the ones that have unique exploration models and approaches to potentially finding large reserves of geologic hydrogen. Way over on the other side are areas where people are saying, what are the technological requirements to get optimal rates of hydrogen production? And so they're based on ideas of in particular, the issue of optimal conditions for hydrogen production are typically hot and deep. But that's more expensive and higher risk to go be sure that you're going to find the source rocks under those conditions. There's a lot of assets that people are finding that are in the upper few kilometers of the Earth's surface. But those are not at optimal temperatures for hydrogen generation. So instead of being at 250 to 350 degrees C, which is the preferred temperature regime, you may be from 50 to 150 degrees C. And so the rates of reaction and the extent of the reaction are going to be slower. So what can you do to modify that? And there's all sorts of ways that people are approaching this, and I don't think we've even seen a fraction of it yet, because a lot of it is in stealth mode and in development. But they do come and tackle these challenges. Can you change the thermal regime of the system where you want to stimulate or initiate hydrogen generation reactions? Can you enhance the permeability of those rocks and get the fluids to move through more effectively to increase the yields of hydrogen generation? Again, can you add any kind of or make any kind of chemical changes to the fluids that are circulating that, again, increases the net yield of hydrogen that you would get through time? And they're just a few examples of the ways people are approaching it. And that is where the US sort of took a leadership role at first of trying to have government funding injected in to help promote the development of those technologies, to bring them online as quick as possible to promote or helps us support commercialization in this area.
Right. Okay. This is the challenge we have, right? And I understand that you are dealing with this challenge right now in Oman with the rock hydrogen project. So lots of people who are watching this video now, they want to hear this. So let's give them what they want. What is the rock hydrogen project? What are you doing? And what is the desired result of what you're learning now in Oman?
Sounds great. I really feel privileged that I have the opportunity right now to lead this rock hydrogen project. And it also stems from all these conversations in 2022, such that we were able to interact with the Grantham Foundation for the Protection of the Environment. And in many conversations with they have both a philanthropic and a venture arm, and both arms are involved in supporting the growth of the geologic hydrogen industry. So we had a lot of just conversations exploring what would be the ways to help catalyze the development of this industry. And ultimately, I pivoted back to them and I said, well, can I pitch you a project? Because I'm very motivated to go to pilot scale as soon as possible. And obviously, this is a big risk going to pilot scale. It's a big investment of both funds and energy and intellectual capital, everything. But I'm a big believer that we need to be generating data at field scale as soon as possible about whether or not stimulated geologic hydrogen can work, and what are actually the technical barriers that most need to be addressed through different innovations. And so the Rock Hydrogen Project is supported by the philanthropic arm of Grantham, and we started the project planning in 23. And now we're here in 2025, and we are moving into the implementation phase of that. And what it is a project based in Oman as a pilot in field scale, trying to do the most robust technical assessment of stimulated geologic hydrogen. We are trying to operate with the best practices we have right now, and to determine how much can we increase the rate of hydrogen production above the current natural baseline using by injecting and circulating fluids through a rock type that should be very prone to hydrogen generation. And this rock hydrogen project is based here in Oman, and the reason we could push to move to pilots so quickly is that we have a decade of experience of drilling into these rocks and studying the existing groundwaters that are currently reacting with the rocks that are currently producing hydrogen. So all of the ingredients are there: water reacting with rock, making hydrogen, changing the mineralogy, producing gases like hydrogen, sustaining microbial communities. And we've already characterized that through prior basic science research, the work through NASA that I was describing before. And that gives you then an incredible framework to say, how would you perturb it? How would you modify the system to now see if you really can increase the rates of hydrogen production? And at the same time, understand how you're changing the environment. So we want to monitor any environmental perturbations that we're creating to make sure that we can help create a safe and effective industry. We want to understand how the microbial communities that already inhabit these systems will respond to stimulation. Can we exceed their rates of activity to make sure that we're producing net hydrogen, or are we going to have some sort of battle between the two? All of that data is needed to better inform what the next steps of the broader community and industry development of geologic hydrogen, I think.
And I guess the reason why it's Oman you're working in, and I'm out of comfort zone here, because I try to understand science and geology, but I could get it wrong. So I'm remembering with help from my script that there's something called the Somali ophiolite in Oman. I guess that's of interest. Can you elaborate a bit on that? And then also, do we have these type of rocks somewhere else? Can we do it even more if it works in Oman? Can we scale it?
Yeah, no, great question. So in choosing to do this pilot in Oman, in part we did it because in Oman there's the Somali ophiolite, extends up into the UAE, and it has a diversity of rock types in Oman, but we're focused very much on these peridotite rocks that are present there. These are rocks from Earth's mantle. They've been abducted onto land, and they're accessible, and again, in these upper few kilometers depth, so we can drill into them without having to go incredibly deep. But peridotite is the rock that has a lot of iron two-bearing minerals, like these olivines and pyroxenes in them, and they should have extremely high potential to produce hydrogen. So when you do chemical modeling of peridotite reacting with water, you get basically the highest yields that you would for any predicted rock type. So it makes them extremely attractive to do that. And also when you model alteration of peridotite, although your best results come at the higher temperatures, you should predict that you'd get good yields even at lower temperatures. So in my mind, I'm like, we should be going after the best rock type for hydrogen generation to see if it can work. Can we really stimulate at the rates needed to be economic? If we can optimize this in peridotite, then we can start to look more broadly at a bunch of other rock types that people are testing in their labs right now. So they have all these iron two-bearing minerals, or they're looking at gabbros or basalts or banded iron formations. All of these have varying potential as hydrogen generators, but peridotite should really outdo them in many regards. So let's start it, especially at field scale, with peridotite there. Now, fortunately, there's a huge amount of peridotite in Oman and the UAE, so that's extremely attractive in terms of the potential for commercialization if it should work in these types of environments. But luckily, it's not restricted geographically to this part of the world. We have ultramafic rocks or peridotite rocks of this composition worldwide. They're in various areas from their so-called tectonic history that people have mapped out pretty well. So we have many other places where we could translate the approach and translate to technology should it work. And I would say right now there's enormous interest in this in North America. So there's a lot of exploration and pilot and project development that's occurring in Canada, Alaska, and in the U.S., where there are ultramafic rock bodies that are accessible that could be potentially utilized in a very similar way to what we're doing in Oman right now.
That is just really, really exciting. Because now it gets really exciting, and it might explain for some of the people listening to our podcasts that where we are normally a bit more on the investment side, and we are deep diving into the science of things here, because what really inspired us to invite you is that we met in London. And when we say London, it was we call it the Geologic event, biannual natural hydrogen discussion, nice event, family reunion for the industry. Everyone could still be at the same pub afterwards. So it's great. But there's you made a presentation, and before I saw your presentation, I was probably still stuck in my old thinking on stimulated hydrogen, that I definitely see the potential that, if we could do it everywhere we want almost, or many new places, that'll be good for business, good for the environment, good for energy security, but that it tended for me to be a bit of a science project. And even if I'm an early stage investor, I'm okay with early risk. It seemed so much that it should be public funded. But I understand now that you remind me that that's why you were eager to do a pilot, so we could actually get real data. And what you presented was something that I interpreted as to be something really good, something better than expected. And I think me and the rest of the audience walked away from that presentation thinking, wow, stimulated hydrogen is probably a bit more mature than we expected. That was the general feeling. So do it quick and painful if you tell me I was wrong in understanding that, or, explain a bit what was it that you told at the conference that, made everyone a bit more excited?
Yeah, I think it's funny you bring that up. I think I did surprise people, and it was fun to share my excitement at that moment in time. And I think in part it's because even in giving this talk, what I had to do is lay out what's our approach to stimulated hydrogen? What is the Rock Hydrogen Project? Why are we doing it in Oman? What's the basis upon which we believe we can stimulate hydrogen generation? And, people are listening to each of these details and going, okay, I'm starting to get what the approaches for stimulated geologic hydrogen, but I think it still remains hypothetical in most people's mind. And we know that there's all these different lab work and different tech development ongoing, but where are we at? And I think what's exciting about the Rock Hydrogen Project and created excitement there is we really are now active at the field scale. And I was able for the first time to say that we had moved forward and had drilled the first borehole, that's an experimental borehole, into these ᴬᵘᵗᵏ. And so we have this kilometer deep borehole in ᴬᵘᵗ, which itself is quite novel, but have injected fluids successfully into it and are reacting them with the rock formation. And we'll take that as step one, which is just that we're in implementation. This is moving forward, much like there's excitement about drilling into active natural hydrogen systems globally at the moment. We're finally drilling. So we have drilled and we have that first well, and we are experimenting. And then the next part is we're measuring hydrogen, and hydrogen that wasn't there immediately after we first drilled, but we have new hydrogen generation occurring. And that gets me really excited and motivated. And I think it was a great opportunity to have the first chance to convey that. And we want to be growing that story as we go forward. The other part that I think was sort of the surprise, and we're puzzling over it and working hard on this right now, is that one of the challenges in stimulated hydrogen is what water are you going to inject? And our project right now is not adding catalysts. We are not changing thermal regimes, any of these. We are creating the baseline to say, if we can start injecting and circulating fluids in ultramafics, how much hydrogen can you make? Then someone else can say, my technology is required to improve this. So we can use things like seawater, groundwater. Technically, you could use desalinated water. We can use treated water from water treatment plants. These are all options that are on the table, but there's a lot of concern in the field. What are the water sources that are accessible to you? What can you use? How do we make sure we don't use really precious water supplies like drinking water or desalinated water? So in our work with the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, what we were permitted to do is to actually inject treated water. That's like from municipal water treatment plants, not using any possible drinking water. And that kind of water is hard. It is got lots of nutrients in it. It has lots of oxidants in it. And on a technical level, you're not expecting to optimize hydrogen generation with it. But we did go ahead and use that as a test case, and we are producing hydrogen under those conditions. We are able to see massive chemical modification of those fluids, and we can make hydrogen. So that means we're taking actually many non-ideal conditions. We're not that hot. We don't have the best water. We do have the microbes active. We have all these confounding factors, and yet we're pushing past them and we're making hydrogen. So that, I think, is extremely promising. And now our work is to show why and how we're doing it. And again, how could you optimize even further? But to have initial success out of the gate like that in an experimental framework that I think is really powerful right now.
It's fair to say that you were positive surprised by that fact.
Yeah, you're asking if I was surprised.
Yeah, well, you were positive surprised that that it worked, kind of good already, even if you hadn't started to do your best, or.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of at the stage right now where if someone drills into a system anywhere and they find hydrogen, they get excited, right? And if they find that they have 95% hydrogen present in their wells, they're like, we have hydrogen here. But the same thing, we've drilled in and we've injected a fluid without hydrogen, and we're pulling back fluids with increasing amounts of hydrogen, just growing in rapidly and getting to very high concentrations. That definitely builds excitement, and gives you, again, this needed framework to say, we can optimize that. If we can do this under relatively simplistic conditions, it gives me a lot of optimism for what the future potential is of growing an effective stimulated hydrogen industry.
You mentioned that there are some other activities right now within this space. You said Alaska, Canada, US. Are they, similar projects? Would there be need to do similar projects, or should the next pilot-like thing with stimulated be something completely different? What would be the obvious
Mm,
next step?
yeah, that's a great question. So, um, I don't want to speak too much to any given company's approach at this point in time, but in the bigger picture, I think a lot of people who have different ultramafic rock assets in their possession would like to be able to demonstrate or test that they can really produce hydrogen and at what scale in their own systems. I do think Oman is an example where, again, I wanted to go to a place where I already understood very well what was already occurring. And in those rocks, they've already been extensively hydrated and oxidized. So I can push them further, make new hydrogen, and demonstrate that as a milestone. And I can increase the TRL of stimulated hydrogen through some of the activities that our team is doing. But a lot of the targets in North America, for example, are actually fresher than the rocks that I'm currently running this project in Oman. That means that those rocks have the potential for higher hydrogen total yields over time. But the different companies that might start to pilot in these are going to need to show that they can kickstart the reactivity of these rocks and then manage it and push them through on using whatever their specific technology is. So no, there's a lot of good reason to do more pilots under different conditions in the United States to broaden the effectiveness of stimulated hydrogen. And I'm really excited to see that. And I try to engage with these other companies, and our team wants to engage with them because one of the things to mention about the Rock Hydrogen Project is, like, we're not a company. We aren't trying to individually commercialize it. We are supported by Grantham to help catalyze the development of this industry. So we want to get data, generate really high quality data, and disseminate it and get it out there for critical review in the community. We want broadly for companies to be able to learn from what we're doing and that help them leapfrog and move faster rather than having to repeat and relearn what we already have. So when we can share information about how we're injecting circulating fluids and the conditions that we think are controlling hydrogen, we want to get that information out so that the other pilots are using that information to do an even better job.
Well, it's a good point. I wanted to ask you whether stimulated hydrogen and natural occurring hydrogen can it coexist? Will it outcompete? But we kind of touched on this already, and the way you said that it's kind of different areas often that you will be looking for, and that is, I understand, one of the big potential with stimulated hydrogen. You can go beyond where it could be naturally occurring. Um, but if I understood correct, that could be different areas, right? That's correctly understood. And
Yep.
yeah.
Well, they can be both. So we haven't touched too much on that.
Because what I really hoped,
Yeah.
that we could also, even if it's different, it also could be both. Because there's so many scenarios you could imagine, natural occurring hydrogen to develop into. But one of the things that it's easy to imagine that find something and it doesn't produce very impressively. It has only a small flow, and finding a way that could kind of enhance that production. Could stimulated be that technology? Could this eventually be something where you could say the normal natural hydrogen company finds something, was hoping for a big reservoir, but it's kind of not working as hoped? Could your technology in the future, what I will call your technology, but stimulated, could it help? Could it be something that enhanced production?
Yeah. It's a really fascinating time right now. I think as each of the companies is looking at its own business model and how it plans to operate too, and they're asking all these questions. So on the natural hydrogen side, I'm a big fan. I want natural hydrogen systems to work. That we're going to find really large reserves of hydrogen globally distributed and we're going to be able to produce those. And in that case, we don't need to intervene and engineer these systems. I think that that's great. It's less energy requirement, less water requirement. It's cheaper to do. We really want that to succeed. However, there may be areas where there's a challenge of optimizing production. And in that case, a lot of what's going on in the stimulated geologic hydrogen realm may well benefit the industry. And it could help in these questions of, can we optimize flow and improve that in different systems? And in part because we don't know yet how tight some of these hydrogen reservoirs are and what those flow rates are going to look like. And so we may need to be able to modify them. We also may need to be able to temporarily heat different types of formations to be able to enhance release of hydrogen that's trapped in these types of systems. And so the technologies in stimulated will come over and be helpful. The other area is that in natural hydrogen, although most of the focus is on where is there a reservoir that has effectively trapped hydrogen and it's sealed in, there's knowledge that there was a source that created that hydrogen. And in some cases, there's a question of whether or not the source still has residual potential in it to make more hydrogen. And so there is the potential that companies could say, well, we're going to first work on hydrogen accumulations that are existing, but we may want to go back and stimulate some of the source rocks to further produce. I think we're not there yet, but I think in terms of understanding the synergies across this space and how almost all of the technology development is probably going to benefit both natural and stimulated hydrogen is, I think, something to keep in mind.
So am I within, reality, at least in the future, when I tell people that ask me, if it only produces very little, will this kill a project? When I tell them that I'm confident that with what we see in stimulated hydrogen and what we know from the general subsurface industry, that this is possibly fixed. You could probably fix it. You could make something produce more. Is that, would you back me
that's
if we
very
were
optimistic. And
discussing this? Would you tell people, yeah, Morten could be right? Or would you say, yeah, we don't know yet?
Okay, so a little bit of what realism I think that's going to creep in is there's a lot of rocks that we will say have the potential to make hydrogen. Data is really starting to flow in and has not been synthesized and put out there yet that shows not all rocks are created equal. We can model it, we can experimentally demonstrate to you. Some will produce a lot more total hydrogen than others, and it's the whole rock chemistry really matters. So I don't go to the fully bullish end, which I would call the Doug Wicks end, which is just we can just drill into basement anywhere and we're going to start producing hydrogen. I will come back off of that and say, no, there are more optimal rock types that exist out there and people should be hunting for them for producing high yields. However, sometimes the amount of hydrogen we need from a system, at least as a function of time, differs. And there's a lot of different rock types we can maybe harness for different hydrogen uses. And I think we need to stay really broad in our interest in our ability to extract hydrogen from those. And so I'm excited about a lot of potential for stimulated hydrogen to be able to provide local on-site use. And that could be for remote communities, that could be for remote mining operations, or there's a variety of reasons that we would want to be able to do that. And do we need a system that can maximally yield hydrogen? Maybe not. There may be, again, local rock types present from which we can extract sufficient hydrogen that allows us to fully move off diesel as well as meet all of the energy needs locally there. And that would be a very exciting end use case for geologic hydrogen as well. So we'll see across the stimulated spectrum, where do you think you're going to have the maximum producer systems? And where will you maybe have things that could be for much more local utilization?
Makes sense. I think this we had a tight schedule in some way, but there's one thing that you're going to touch on a bit, because now we have you here, and because I know that you also you touched on it a bit, but that you're looking into the microbial side of things. Basically what's going on. Geobiology. What's going on in the subsurface, and my humble understanding and opinion is that it could mean a lot would mean a lot for hydrogen. And I worry less about whether or not a seal can be tight enough to hold hydrogen down. I think that you will see people questioning this, and that's probably doable. But my question will be, how long can it stay there? Will something eat it? And I think that's something I know you've been looking into, and I wonder if that is something where you see stimulated having an advantage over naturally occurring when taking microbial life into account.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm obviously vested in this area, but I think we need to start moving down. This is one of the big unknowns that we need to address. So, the plant, as I said, the planet continuously makes hydrogen, and the big question has been, when do we accumulate and preserve it? What controls preservation? And to de-risk natural hydrogen systems, I really think we're going to have to be able to come in and say, which reservoirs will microbial activity be so fast in those systems that no matter how much is migrating in, we are essentially going to effectively scrub it away and consume it, and not lead to an economic accumulation. I think that's really important in the exploration models that are being developed for geologic hydrogen. And so I'd like to reach out and get more companies engaged in addressing that problem. But we also know that microbes really can vary how fast they're active over many, many orders of magnitude, and we're getting increasing insights to when they're at their optimum fastest rates and when they're slowest. And we do accumulate hydrogen in geologic systems because a lot of times they're not scrubbing it all away. So if we could start to understand that, it will again help us to really know where to look for the optimal conditions for hydrogen preservation. So I think it's an interesting area where we tangibly can get data at field scale and start to get the required data for the new models, hydrogen system models that are in development by many different groups globally at the moment. With stimulated, I think our rock hydrogen project will definitely generate some pretty direct data on this front. We have information already on who are the microbial communities present in the rocks and the waters that we're stimulating. We have already measured how fast they function. We've done this as essential baseline characterization of these systems, and now we're stimulating. And so we will be getting an insight into how do they respond to this, and can we essentially outcompete them and produce hydrogen faster than they can consume? And I'd say the data so far looks like the answer on that is yes. But overall, I do think stimulated has an advantage there because of the time scales. In the end, the microbial communities are extremely efficient at consuming hydrogen, but they can only go so fast. You give them geologic timescales, that's a very different result than over months to years of really increasing the rate of hydrogen production. And if we're able to turn the teeter-totter here and we increase the rate of production and we decrease the rate of consumption, we can really enhance net hydrogen yields. So stimulation is on that side. It is shifting the balance compared to what's going on in natural hydrogen systems.
Yeah, and well, since we just mentioned Oman and the project and what you're doing there, let's loop that back into the discussion. And what I know about Oman, or what I know because I haven't been yet, it would be nice to see it at one point. Maybe check out the project before it's finished. Is that Oman is a big oil and gas nation. Actually, just looking here, it's among the top 25 countries by oil reserves, top 20 in oil production worldwide. So they're generally energy resilient. But now they seem to be looking at natural hydrogen. And this is going to be more of an opinion question. I would love to know more about how you see them treating natural hydrogen and how similar countries, because I personally have a background in an oil giant, which is Venezuela in my case, how these countries can act if they find natural hydrogen. Could it be part of their strategy, their energy strategy, or what could it be?
Yeah, I'll keep my focus to Oman because I don't feel qualified to speak to like what might happen in South America or elsewhere. I think Isabel Moretti, for example, would be a great person for you to pull onto the show and probe her points of view on this. But just stepping back to Oman, one, you should visit that. It's one of the most beautiful countries, and I've been working there for over a decade now, and so appreciative of all of the help and engagement over time that we've had working with the different ministries. we originally came there looking more at water resource availability and what controlled where there was good potable water versus gassy, so-called hydrogen water, for different reasons. It's been interesting to me with the Sultan and the Oman that has a very forward-looking national energy strategy and net zero goals that they're very much committed to making. They, in Oman, want to diversify the different types of energy sources beyond just fossil fuels, and so they're already on that path. In Oman, there has been an enormous amount of effort to establish it as a green hydrogen hub and to build the infrastructure needed for that, and to build engagement with various companies that are producing green hydrogen, both for things like ammonia production, but also looking towards future export. So all of that is underway, independent of geologic hydrogen. And then we come to this expansion of awareness and interest in geologic hydrogen over these past few years. And in Oman, it makes a lot of sense from the get-go there, in terms of understanding how to harness their own natural resources and to say, okay, if we can make geologic hydrogen, that can fit into our broader hydrogen strategy. And so in general, I don't have insight into where they're at right now, but they definitely are interacting with many different companies that are interested in both natural and stimulated hydrogen and are approaching them about opportunities to do exploration or move towards commercialization in Oman. And I think they're also just critically thinking about, is it hydrogen that we want to see as an application in ᴬᵘᵗᵏ resources or other things? So they have a lot of strategic decisions that to make that I don't have insight into, but I think Oman's vision and efforts towards these net zero goals and in trying to integrate hydrogen into its energy infrastructure is very inspiring.
Yeah, and thank you for the response, because it's a wonderful way to look at it. I think something I mentioned quite a few episodes back to Morten is that the audience that we have is not only going to be scientists in the space or investors interested in the space. It might be simply people who are looking at energy and saying, well, we need clean energy. This is another form of it. So hearing that Oman, which is traditionally oil and gas, is interested in these types of cleaner energies is fantastic, and good on Oman. As I said, I would love to go there and see it up close. But now back to the script, as Morten likes saying. This is the final question. We've been actually running over a bit. I always ask this question, and I want to know what you feel about natural hydrogen as it progresses towards the future. Usually we ask around a 5 and 10-year scale, right? But I mean, if you feel there could be a 20-year scale or a 2-year scale, maybe just tell me that instead. How do you feel about the projection of the future of natural hydrogen and stimulated hydrogen, especially?
Yeah, I think for that one, as we're wrapping up, I'll just focus on stimulated, since you have plenty of folks that come talk to you and speak to these perspectives in the natural hydrogen system. So with stimulated in these next 5 years, I think it's going to be really important to get to sort of operating systems where we're successfully producing hydrogen at the wellhead and have direct application and use of that hydrogen. I think having a couple of these full pilot demonstrations that go to that will really be help sustain the growth of this field. And there are a lot of places where I think we can come to very direct application of like, here's a good location where we can both have the source rocks, we can stimulate, we're going to produce hydrogen at sufficient enough rates we can use it here, for example, in like a local use case. And even I'd say a year and a half ago, I was in a meeting in Alaska. I mean, that was very inspiring there, sort of trying to talk about what some of the local use cases in Alaska could be. For example, if they were to help build the entire infrastructure from working with the legislature and creating the framework for stimulated hydrogen all the way to having someone put a full pilot demonstration into place. I think we're going to see that happen in multiple places globally. It definitely should be able to happen in North America, in the Middle East, Australia. I think if we could see that start to occur in the next 5 years, that would be really exciting. And from there, we will be able to see much better what technologies are ready to be brought online to really increase the rate of both hydrogen production and help us scale the size of these operations. so that you can then look at, okay, are we going to move now towards moving industry there, making ammonia plants locally associated with it? Are we actually starting to move hydrogen away from sites of production? And how large will this scale? I think all of that will happen in the following 5 years, but I'm really focused for myself right now in those first 5 years. How do we get multiple successful demonstrations occurring where we're both producing and using the energy locally from a stimulated project?
And to get there, I think we need to win the battle against these microorganisms, these evil microorganisms that are eating up all
But
of
I
our...
really don't think they're too bad for stimulated, and they're not going to knock it back so far. There, what we need is the mechanics to work, the chemistry to work. And I love the biology and want to know what it's doing, but it's really the mechanical, thermal, chemical side. If we can get those to play well together, and control them in the way we engineer these systems, we ought to be able to hit our targets.
Fantastic. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on this program today, because we've enjoyed the idea of interviewing you, of getting more on stimulated hydrogen for quite a while, actually. And now that we have you here, it's such a pleasure. We want to thank everybody for watching again our episodes and following our podcast. Remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're following it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please subscribe so you can stay updated, and share it with your colleagues because they can stay updated too. We also updated, as I mentioned before, the investor report 2025 for natural hydrogen. I always change the order of the words for some reason, but it's the report. It's on our website. It's free. You can subscribe for it. You can get it for free, and you'll be subscribed for our newsletter, which is actually quite enjoyable, as Alexis and Morten will tell you too. So hopefully we'll see you in the next episode, and enjoy. I mean, please share this. Thank you. Thank you, Alexis, also for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you very much.